Craving your next action-packed adventure? Audible delivers thrills of every kind on your command, like Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, where a lone astronaut must save humanity from extinction, narrated with stunning intensity by Ray Porter. From electrifying suspense and daring quest to spine-tingling horror and romance in far-off realms, unleash your adventurous side with gripping titles that'll keep you guessing. Discover exclusive Audible originals, hotly anticipated new releases, and must-listen bestsellers that hook you from the first minute. Because Audible knows there's no greater thrill than the one that speaks to you. Discover what lies beyond the edge of your seat. Start your free 30-day trial at audible.com/WonderyUS. That's audible.com/WonderyUS.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 29 of the True Crime All the Time Unsolved podcast. I'm Mike Ferguson, and with me, as always, is my partner in true crime, Mike Gibson. Gibby, what is up today?
Hey, man, I'm doing pretty good.
Pretty good.
Pretty good.
Not great.
Well, pretty good.
Not shitty, just pretty good.
Yeah, pretty good.
All right, I'll take that.
Yeah.
All right, Gibbs, let's start out with some Patreon shout-outs. We have Kathy Davis, Jillian Major, Hyenasaur, Betty Jackson, and we actually hung out with Betty at CrimeCon.
Yeah, we did. She's a true crime, all the time big fan.
Yep. True crime aficionado. So much, in fact, that she ended up getting a CrimeCon tattoo with her husband's fingerprint in it.
That's the one that she's willing to show us.
Yeah, we don't know about the other ones. Come on, Betty.
Yeah.
Then we have Rachel Cooper and Megan Marie. So thank you, everyone, for your support.
Appreciate it.
It means a lot to us. And thank you so much to all the people that continue to support us. And Gibbs, one of our new traditions is to pick somebody that started supporting us early on.
Yeah.
Continues to support us. And that person is Roberta Miller. Roberta, thank you so much for supporting the show.
Appreciate it.
Since the beginning.
Yeah, almost from the first episode, if I remember.
Yeah, I mean, she was in from very, very early on, so very much appreciated. So, Gibbs, let's talk about True Crime All the Time. Great episode coming out Sunday night, same time as this. So it's there waiting on you if you're listening to this first.
Yeah, very alarming.
Robert Charles Brown. Not a big-time serial killer name.
I think he competes.
But, yeah, to your point, could possibly be one of the most prolific serial killers in U.S. history.
It certainly had me thinking.
Yeah, very interesting in how everything goes down. I don't want to give too much away. You have to listen to it.
But I think, like you said, coming away from it, you will wonder, as we do, if he is not one of the most, like you said, prolific killers of all time.
In the U.S., for sure.
Yes.
In the U.S., yeah. Yeah, you got some people outside the U.S. with some astronomical numbers.
Yeah, that's just some bizarre stuff out there.
I would say we're lagging in that department, but I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
We're not looking to compete in that arena.
No.
So if you haven't checked out the website lately, give it a look, truecrimeallthetime.com. You'll find all of our contact information. The voicemail number is out there. Merchandise information is out there. And for the voicemail number, Gibbs, we're going to be doing that Q&A episode in a couple of weeks. It's going to come out probably midweek. It's not going to replace an episode. It's going to be in addition to. And so you still have time to leave us a voicemail with any questions that you have. And we'll play the voicemail and then we'll answer them in the episode.
That's going to be good.
No, we should be able to have a lot of fun with it.
Yep.
Because we're not talking about victims and we're not talking about such serious subject matter that we can be much more light. free
Yeah.
to say what we want.
And I think
Not that we hold, I don't want people to think we hold back, but we do try to be very respectful.
sure.
And there's certain things that, we just feel like you can't make a joke in certain areas of the podcast, especially when you're talking about victims and their families. And it's hard you can't make light of some of that.
Right. And man, there's a lot of questions people want answered.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be pretty exciting.
And some strange ones too.
Well, yeah, a few bizarre,
But I think some of them are funny.
but we're answering
There's
Or
one.
try.
There's one about whether or not you and I would help each other hide a body. Start thinking about that.
You mean again?
Yeah, I was going to say the thing is they don't already know.
Yeah.
So
I mean, depends how they ask that question.
we'll have to play it off. Oh, did I hit the button already? I'm recording, Gibbs. Jeezy Pete.
Did you record that?
So we got a couple voicemails that we'll play at the end of the show. But Gibbs, we've got to get into this case. And we're talking about Greg and Bernadette Ohlemacher. And it's a very interesting unsolved case. It's been profiled on, I think, 48 Hours or one of those.
Yeah, one of those news story shows.
Yeah, I saw it years ago. So it takes place in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which, Gibbs, you always talk about all the places you've been. Albuquerque is one of my favorite cities.
Man, what a beautiful city.
It's gorgeous.
The skyline scenery, kind of like when you drive through.
Right.
Man.
So you've got city, and then you look over here, you're looking at mountains.
Yeah.
It's just really cool. I guess from where we come from, we never see anything like that.
We don't, man.
All we see is
Corn,
cows, and
soybean.
flat farmland. So let's talk a little bit about John and Bernadette. So John Gregory Ohlemacher was born March 17th, 1959, and he was born in Houghton County, Michigan. He would join the U.S. Air Force and would actually end up retiring as a master sergeant.
It's pretty impressive.
It is very impressive. And so after he does that, this guy's not just sitting around, Gibbs, collecting his money from Uncle Sam. He goes out and gets a job at Xerox in Albuquerque.
Dedicated.
Yeah, I mean, this guy, to me, sounds like a hard worker. He just didn't want to sit around collecting his retirement from the Air Force. He wanted to go out and do something.
Yeah, he said, "That's I'm still young, man. I could still make some more money."
Yeah, take another job, live my life. And then you have Bernadette. She was born on April 21st, 1959, and she also joined the Air Force, retired as a sergeant. Impressive as well.
Absolutely.
And again, you have to say the same thing about Bernadette. I have a ton of respect for both of these individuals because she did the same thing, Gibbs. She ends up taking a job with the FAA. So they served their country. They put in a ton of time there.
Sure.
And now they're out embarking on new adventures in new fields. It's impressive. It really is. And you have to talk about Bernadette because when everything you read, it's all about, how active she was, how much energy she had. It was also said that she was into this very healthy lifestyle, eating, exercising, all of those things that I need to do, Gibbs, and I don't do.
Yes.
My wife's on me about.
We both need that.
So it's probably no shock that Greg and Bernadette met while they were in the Air Force, and they ended up getting married. They made their first home together in Alaska. That had to have been an adventure in and of itself.
I think it might be kind of cool. Depending on how long you were going to be stationed there.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I've never been to Alaska, and I know a lot of people love it.
Yeah.
The only thing I would have a real tough time with about living in Alaska is the long periods of darkness and the long periods of light.
They got to play with your psyche, man.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure which one would be harder.
Yeah.
I'm thinking the fact that it's light when you got to go to bed, because I can't go to bed during the day.
Yeah, you have to be able to black out your room or something.
Yeah, I think that would be tough.
I might have a little bit problem with how freaking cold it can be there too.
Yeah, I don't know. It gets freaking cold here, but
Yeah, that's true.
I get you. So after retiring, they both retire. They end up moving to Albuquerque. into this small suburb called Paradise Hills, and they do this so that they're closer to Bernadette's family, who's in Albuquerque. Now, the Ohlemachers had 2 children. Their first child, Marlene, she passed away as an infant. And then their second child, Renee, lived with them in Albuquerque. So you have the whole Ohlemacher family living in Albuquerque, Greg, Bernadette, their daughter, Renee, who at this point is 20 years old, and they have a dog named Sammy Joe. And you have to include the dog, Gibbs.
Always got to include the dog.
Dogs are family too.
Yep.
So Gibbs, that was the setup. We're setting it up for August 2nd, 2005. And Bernadette wakes up around 5 a.m. She goes downstairs to let the dog out and to make some coffee. Then she goes upstairs to take a shower. Sometime after 5, this is when an assailant comes into the bedroom, attacks Greg. They have a struggle, and then shoots Greg at very close range in the back. Now, while all of this is going on, Gibbs, keep in mind, Bernadette's been in the shower. As she's getting out of the shower, the assailant goes into the bathroom and immediately shoots Bernadette in the chest at what is essentially point-blank range. Very, very close. So I just want to talk a little bit about this part, Gibbs, because we have to analyze this as we go a little bit.
Sure.
There's one thing that jumps out at me from this part, and that's that it doesn't feel random.
And I agree with you. It's not the random type of murder, right? I mean, it's very orchestrated.
Yeah, Gibbs, I mean, the biggest thing to me is, why does somebody enter a home, essentially execute 2 people? You have to look at what's the reason behind it. And obviously, we're going to dive into a lot of this, but my initial thoughts are, there's no robbery, so you can take that off the table.
Right.
There's no sexual assault.
So that's off the table.
That's off the table. What are you left with?
Yeah. I mean, it's got to be personal.
Personal. And I think that's why I wanted to talk about it right there, just based off of that, how the killing actually occurred. That jumped out at me right away, thinking about motive. and who we're going to talk about, of different, who it could have been, things like that. So now we have to talk about Renee, because remember, Renee's in the house as well. And Renee is going to say later on that what she remembered was her dad yelling, "What are you doing?" She heard her mom scream, and then she heard gunshots. Now, she also says that she was kind of just waking up, right? Kind of half in, half out kind of sleep thing.
Yeah, groggy.
Yeah, kind of groggy at that point. But Renee runs to her bedroom closet and calls the police. But we got to talk about this, Gibbs. She doesn't call 911 at first.
No, she calls the local police number at first, which seems to be a little strange.
Well, it is strange to me because I've lived in the same place for a very long time, in the same city. I have no idea what the local police number is.
No, but you know what 911 means.
And we're taught from a very young age about 911.
Right.
So that fact to me is strange. There's no 2 ways about it. Now, she eventually does call 911.
This is 911. Where is your emergency? My parents were shot. Your what? My parents, I think they were shot. I'm sorry, what is your name? Renee. How old are you, Renee? Huh?
I'm 20 years old.
Is this a house or an apartment where you're at?
This is a house.
Okay, now what did you see that you feel this happened?
I heard it. I just heard it now. And I can't hear them moving at all. I heard somebody run up the stairs, and then I heard gunshots. I'm sitting in the closet.
Are you in the closet? Okay.
Yeah.
Stay on the phone with me, okay?
I'm sorry. I'm so scared.
Ma'am, stay on the line with me, okay?
Okay. Are they coming? I'm so scared.
Okay, hold on a second. We're on the way, okay? Do you hear anything else?
I just heard my mom scream really loud.
She's what?
My mom.
You heard her scream?
Yeah, and my dad said, what are you doing?
Is there any suspicious vehicles out there?
I need to see. I'm still in the closet. I was so loud.
That's okay. Just stay there.
Okay.
How many shots were fired?
I think 5 or 6. I was like half awake, half asleep.
Anybody else in the house?
I don't, just me.
Just you? No other children?
No, and my dog.
Okay.
I probably shot my dog too.
Who do you think might have done this?
I really don't know. I really don't know.
Have you heard anything else, ma'am?
No. How will I know if the cops are here?
We're already on the way with police and paramedics.
How will I know that they'll be here?
I'll let you know.
Okay.
I'll let you know when to come out of the closet, okay?
Okay. Are they in the house yet?
Okay, we're checking the outside of the house first, okay?
Okay, because I don't want to see my parents if they're shot.
I understand, ma'am. We're checking the house. Ma'am?
Yeah?
Is there any way you can come out and out to the front door?
I'll try. Let me try.
Are you out of the closet?
Yeah, I just saw my parents, Sam.
What's wrong with
They're shot. They're shot. Wait, hold on. Danny.
Go to the front door, ma'am, please. Okay. Go to the front door. The officer's waiting for you.
All right, Gibbs. So we don't normally play a lot of 911 calls on our episodes. And especially something like that was pretty long. But I think you have to hear it in its entirety. And the other thing that I don't want to do is analyze too much. You know, I think it's really tough. And I've talked about it before. I know I have. It's really tough to analyze how somebody would react, should react. Now, they're going to do that later.
Sure.
But I think for you and I, it's really tough to say, should she have been crying more when she saw her parents? Should she have, screamed or been more upset? You just don't really know.
Until you're in that situation yourself.
Yeah.
How can you say how someone should act?
Yeah, I think it's really tough. But it's the reason why I wanted to play the call is I want to let the listeners hear it. They can make those type of judgments if they want to, or
they can
what ifs or all that stuff.
Yeah, they can look at it in their own way and determine how they want to see it.
Plus, I think the call helps as we go through the case.
Absolutely,
because it's going to come up
many times. So
the police show up on the scene. Renee's there. The dog Sammy Joe is there. It was said, Gibbs, that Renee was shaken up to the point where she was having a hard time even standing, walking. Again, she did just see her parents dead.
Yeah, and there's some photos and videos out there of her coming out of the house and walking by the police, and you can really see she is shaken up, like you said, and looks like she's going to fall over.
So Renee is very cooperative with the police as they start their investigation. She gives police right off the bat permission to search the house. And one thing that she says in particular, Gibbs, that I think we have to point out is that as she's giving police this permission to search the house, she specifically says, and you can search my room too, I have nothing to hide.
Kind of a strange thing to say.
It's kind of strange. Again, she's shaken up.
She's in shock.
I don't want to put too much on it, but
right.
I want to put it in the story because it's real. It happened.
Sure.
It's part of it. So the police take swipes of her hands. They do that to check for gunpowder residue. It comes back negative. And one thing that Renee does do is she offers up very early on to take a polygraph. But the police don't take her up on this. They don't, I don't know if you want to say they don't allow her to, but
they just don't pursue it.
They just don't go down that path. So we have to talk about some of the things that police find in their initial investigation. So they see that there were no signs of forced entry. Now we have to go back to what Bernadette did when she got up, right? She let Sammy Joe out the back door.
Right.
So that door would have most likely been unlocked at that point.
So possible entry point.
Possible entry point. The other thing that the police find is like one of those tall work ladders, and it's leaning up against the house and apparently had been there for a number of days.
Yeah.
So possible entry method?
Possible, but I think the police dust for prints and can't find any unidentified prints on it. So I kind of think that gets eliminated.
So Gibbs, I think it's safe to say that the police don't find a lot in their search of the house and in this initial investigation.
Yeah, and like you said earlier, there's no theft. Nothing's missing. No sexual assault. No forced entry. So it really limits what direction you go into.
Well, and the other thing, and we didn't talk about it the first time, but someone comes in, shoots Greg and Bernadette, but they don't bother Renee. It's just something to point out, but I think the police take notice of it too, because pretty early on, Gibbs, they start to look at Renee as a suspect.
Yeah, and I think in any case, they would probably do that at this point, right? Any survivor.
Yeah, I think any situation like this, Gibbs, where you have multiple people killed or even one person, but you have one survivor, I mean, they're going to have to take a look at that person.
Sure. Somehow you got to eliminate them as a suspect.
But one of the things that's very interesting, and it's going to come up throughout this case, is there's members of the family that are also suspicious of Renee pretty early on. And you have to take a look at what happens at the funeral. What came out from people that attended the funeral was that Renee was texting on her phone a lot during the funeral. And the family found that extremely odd.
What do you think about that? Do you find that odd? Do you think in today's time, well, this is 2005, right? So that's what everybody was doing at that time, was texting, right? We didn't have the social media, but would you text at your parents' funeral? I don't think so. I don't think it's proper.
No, I don't think it's proper either. I wouldn't do it. Would a 20-year-old do it? I don't know.
I don't know either.
Again, I want to be careful about analyzing it too much, but you got to bring it up.
Yeah, I think you talk about it, but you got to be careful over analyzing.
But I feel comfortable saying, to me, I would find that strange as well.
Yeah, I think my focus would be elsewhere.
Yes. So during the investigation, you have police interviewing the family as well. And at one point, they interview Renee's grandmother, Bernadette's mom. And they ask her point blank if she thought Renee had anything to do with the murders. And she actually says yes. She believes that her own granddaughter may have had something to do with these murders. And she goes on to talk about how Renee had been acting, and specifically an interaction that she had when she asked her about Bernadette. And what comes out is that Renee says that she loved her mom, but she didn't miss her. Now, if that's a true statement from the grandmother, which you would think it probably is, I don't know why the grandmother would lie about it.
Right.
Again, that's a strange thing.
That is a strange thing to
say. What we have, Gibbs, is a lot of strange activity, I think.
Sure.
That's the best way for me to put it. And I think it's why the focus or the spotlight ends up on Renee.
Yeah, because it's shown some doubt to her story when you hear this kind of stuff. So it makes you speculate and wonder.
So in the months following the murder, Renee's not staying at the house. Couldn't do that, Gibbs. I don't know how I couldn't.
I couldn't either.
That would be really tough. So what she ends up doing is moving around, staying with different family members. At one point, she's staying with her aunt, Bernadette's sister. Her aunt comes right out and asks Renee, "Did you have anything to do with this?" And Renee says, no, she didn't. But it's documented, Gibbs, that the aunt says she just she didn't believe her.
No, she just didn't feel confident with her answer. She has that doubt back in her mind that there's something there.
So what I find odd, Gibbs, is how quickly some of the family members become suspicious of Renee. Because it seems like it happens very, very quickly. And it has to be based on things that have happened in the past.
I would agree.
And some of those things are going to come out.
Yes.
And we're going to touch on them. But without disclosing those, if you just looked at it on the surface, you would think, well, that's very strange that they kind of turn on her so quickly.
Yeah. And I think that really hurt her feelings, Renee's. From her perspective, she just lost the most important people in her life. Her mom, her dad, they're gone in a terrible way. And she's got the police coming at her. Nobody in her corner. Now she's got the only people that live around her that should care about her. And they're basically attacking her. She's got to feel pretty crummy. Nobody in her corner.
Yeah, all the way around, this is what makes up a lot of the intrigue of this story. So, Gibbs, we have to talk about money because it's another central theme in this case. Renee has no money of her own, but what she does know is that her parents had a $500,000 life insurance policy, but right now their estate is held up in probate, but Renee wants to go to college, an out-of-state college. That's expensive.
That is expensive.
But I don't blame her for wanting to go to college. I mean, that's normal.
Sure.
Where it gets a little sideways is that she starts looking at BMWs. At one point, she goes to her aunt's work and is talking very excitedly, almost giddy, about how she went and looked at BMWs and she wants to test drive one. And as soon as she gets the money, she's going to buy it. That just, to me, I think Gibbs cemented in the aunt's mind, something's not right here.
Yeah, it can be perceived as a strange action to take after one loses their parents. But you could flip the coin on that as well and say that maybe it's just how she's dealing with the loss of her parents, is trying to move forward and trying to find some type of joy of, maybe for her to have the money from her parents, to buy a nice car is celebrating their life. I don't know. I mean, you can definitely put some spins on it.
Well, and to that point, the other spin is we're talking about a 20-year-old.
Exactly.
And we're talking about the decisions that a 20-year-old makes. You and I have kids.
Right.
We know that they don't always act the way you think they should act.
I agree.
In certain situations.
Right.
And so, again, I want to be fair as we're telling this story and tell both sides.
Yes.
And I think you could make the argument
clearly
about both of those.
Yeah, I think you could. You could stand on both sides of the fence and debate it fairly well.
You and I kind of talked about this early on when we mentioned the fact that Renee called the local police number prior to calling 911. And that is something that the family, I think, really struggled with. For the same reasons that you and I talked about, just not understanding how anyone in fear of their life would not know to call 911.
Yeah, I think it's a valid point on their side. I struggle with that myself, I'm trying to figure out, it's so easy just to hit 911 versus hitting all those other numbers.
Well, and I go back to my point, which is, why do you even know that number? Or did you take the time to look it up?
Yeah, and if you did take the time to look it up, why? I mean, why? Especially if you thought someone was still in the house that could be coming for you, why would you want any type of delay?
And that's where I think some of the family members talk about or, start to think about and verbalize the fact that, why would she do that? Was she trying to buy time for some reason by doing that the way she did?
Yeah, how much time actually went by from the time that the shooting occurred before she actually called 911?
All right, Gibbs. So we have to talk about Sammy Joe the dog. Big part of this story. We described Bernadette's actions that morning, coming down at 5, unlocking the door, letting the dog out. Now, some of that is theorized by police. The coffee's not. They would have been able to tell if she made the coffee. The door was unlocked. There's no way to know for sure if she let the dog out, but I think it's a pretty good theory because that's a morning routine that even Renee backed up. And as a dog owner, when you get up, the dog wants to go out. It's one of the first things you do.
First thing, let the dog out.
Because this is another issue that I think the family has in reconciling all of this, because it came out from everybody, Gibbs, that Sammy Joe was a barker, a loud barker to strangers. Anybody that the dog didn't know, that didn't live in the house or had seen on a regular basis, this dog barked at. Now, Renee would tell the police that the dog was barking while she was in the closet. But we listened to the 911 tape. I didn't hear any dog.
Yeah, I didn't either. You can back up and play it again, and you won't hear it either.
I think that's why it's a central part of this case. It comes up at trial. We're going to talk about it some more. But the other issue I have is that what you can hear on the 911 tape is Renee talking to the dog. And the dog is in the house at the point where the police get there. So that's something that I'm struggling to figure out. So did Bernadette let the dog out? Because we know the door was unlocked. Did she let the dog back in? Possibly before she went upstairs to take her shower. That's possible.
Possible.
And I think the other possibility is the assailant gained access from that back door and the dog came in at that same time, was not barking because they knew who it was.
Plausible.
That's another possibility.
Sure.
So Gibbs, we think that the police were pretty locked in on Renee right now, right? They're looking at her. The family's kind of looking at her suspiciously. And I think from Renee's point of view, she definitely thinks the police are locked in on her. And to the point where she believes that the police aren't doing their job to find the real killer, the people that killed her mom and dad, which I think is how anybody would feel if the police were zeroed in on them and they didn't do it.
Yeah, if they were innocent, they'd be like, what the heck are you guys doing?
Right. Go out and find the people that did this.
Yeah, quit wasting your time on me and go get the killers.
So around 10 months after the murders, police have a new suspect. And this turns out to be a man named Ron Santiago. And Santiago was a mortgage loan officer at Countrywide Home Loans. But he was also the Ohlemacher loan officer. Because at the time that they were murdered, Greg and Bernadette were working with Ron Santiago to refinance their home. But the loan wasn't going through the way that the Ohlemachers had hoped. There was some holdups.
Yeah, I think they were kind of promised a cash out, of the refi. And I think those promises of that cash out started turning the other way, that it couldn't be done.
Yeah, Gibbs, to your point, there is a point in time where Santiago tells the Ohlemachers that they're not going to be getting this cash out. And I think they were upset by that. And it's not long after this happens, this conversation happens, that they're murdered.
Yeah, and Santiago, he hears about this on the news and shocked, of course, very sad, because he kind of knew the folks over the short period of time of taking their application and trying to work with them, that, he cried over it and felt bad for the family, as anybody would that would know somebody in this situation.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we are talking about 2005. And this is when the mortgage market was booming.
Man, it was super hot.
And people were doing a lot of refis and a lot of cash out refis.
Right.
And a lot of this is what would ultimately lead to the housing market crash.
Yeah, these guys were working 16 hours a day, turning mortgages and refis, man. So they were making a lot of money fast.
And I think Ron Santiago was riding that tidal wave, just like a lot of other mortgage loan officers. So Gibbs, we talked about Ron getting on the police radar, and I think we have to talk a little bit about how that happened. So in 2006, a couple named the Howards, they met with Ron to refinance their home. Ron told them they were pre-approved, and it appeared that he was delivering on this refinance because he gave the Howards 2 countrywide checks totaling more than $240,000. The problem is that the bank is going to come back and say the checks are fake. This causes the Howards to contact Countrywide, and this is when they learned that their loan had not been processed. Ron Santiago kind of basically had been stringing them along.
So, yeah, Mike, this is interesting because the Howards go to Countrywide to complain about this, to talk to management, and when they arrive, it's just a few minutes later that the Secret Service actually call Countrywide to talk to the Countrywide manager because Ron just showed up at the local Secret Service office to turn himself in for forging checks because it got to his conscience and he was concerned, and he went there and basically told him everything that happened.
Wow.
Yeah. He said he went in and he told him that he was trying to process their loan. He just needed more time, and he thought the way to do this is to cut the checks to him, and by the time that they would actually cash them, that he would actually have the loan approved and the checks would actually be valid. But that backfired, and so he wanted to, clear his conscience and make right.
So it's kind of amazing when you think about it. It goes back to what we were talking about, 2005, the way the mortgage industry was. It was extremely competitive. And, these mortgage loan officers, they were doing whatever they had to do to try to close these loans and these refinances because, like we talked about, Gibbs, they were making a shit ton of money.
Oh, man, big time. And it really got to Ron so bad that when he was being interviewed by the Secret Service agent was concerned for his health and welfare, of his state of mind, that he actually drove him over to a mental facility for observation. That's how bad he felt about what he did to his clients.
And I think that tells you something. The guy had a conscience, and it does sound like to me, Gibbs, that he was doing something that he knew was wrong, but he was doing it to try to buy a little bit of time, and he thought he could correct it.
Yeah.
And that nobody would find out. That's what it sounds like.
Absolutely it does.
But the fact that he turned himself in, that has to go for something.
I think so. I think if you want to say you get credit for something, I guess you could say you get a little credit for that.
Yeah.
Where it kind of goes kind of strange, takes a twist, is Mrs. Howard later starts thinking about this whole thing. And she recalls the day that they got the checks from Ron, her husband called her from his work saying that his brakes went out. And they took it to one of the local brake repair shops. When they put it up on the rack, they said, "Someone cut your brake lines." And she immediately thinks Ron must have done it because he wanted to do away with any witnesses to this forging of the checks. And so she calls this Secret Service agent and tells them this story. And then they look into it. But eventually there's no evidence pointing back to Ron on this. And Ron says, I would never would do something like that over something like forged checks or anything.
So the one thing that jumps out to me, Gibbs, about that is, so if he kills the couple or just the man, I don't see how that solves any of his problems unless he thought for some reason they were both going to be in the truck at the same time. And the other thing is, if they're dead, he's not going to get any money out of the refi.
Yeah, doesn't help him there, and you still have these checks that are out there that could come back to haunt him as well.
Right. It's not like the checks disappear.
Yeah.
The only thing that, if it were to happen that somehow both of those individuals would be killed at the same time, they can't talk to anybody about it, but the evidence has already been sent to the bank. It's out there. He can't get that back.
Yeah, he can't pull that back in.
So I just want to kind of point that out. That's something that jumped out at me.
But because of this, it kind of opens up some more investigation and more questioning with Ron. And through this, it's discovered that Ron was working on getting a loan for Greg and Bernadette. And, of course, being from that community, the Secret Service agent recalls immediately what happened to them. So the Secret Service agent reaches out to the local police department for the police report. And in the police report, it calls out a 9mm Ruger as the murder weapon. So at this point, the agent asked Ron, do you or have you ever owned a 9mm Ruger? And Ron's response was, yes, I did. However, I traded it. So that piques the agent's interest initially right away.
Well, yeah, I would think it would. Him saying that he owned a gun similar to the murder weapon, but also him saying, Gibbs, that he traded it, but was murky on the details. Now, I don't think that helped him at all.
No. I mean, to the point after he has his phone interview with Ron, he calls back the police detective, and him and the agent and the police detective, they immediately go to the mental hospital where Ron's located. They decide to go ahead and have about a 2-hour interview and discuss greater details about this. So, of course, they recorded the interview.
And on that recording, Gibbs, you can hear the detective come right out and accuse Ron. I mean, he says, you went to the Ohlemachers and you ended up shooting them. And Ron answers, sir, I did not hurt anybody. The detective comes back and says, you were there. And Ron answers to that, sir, I was not there. I didn't shoot anybody.
While they're questioning him for the 2 hours, there's another group of detectives searching Ron's house, looking for any evidence that they could tie back to the murder scene. And while they're doing this, they come across what they would call an ammo bag in the garage. And in that ammo bag, they will say they find a 9mm fired shell casing that matched the 4 shell casings found at the murder scene. When they asked Ron about that, he acted like he didn't know what they were talking about.
So, Gibbs, for me, that's some pretty damning evidence because, that type of ballistic evidence, it says a lot. I mean, if that was really Ron's spent shell casing, that means it's been fired from a gun.
Yeah.
And then, when they put it under the microscope and they're looking at I don't know all the technical terms, but the striations and, they can tell that it matches the ones that they recovered from the bedroom where the Ohlemachers were killed.
It's serious enough that it lands him in jail. They arrest him.
I can't imagine it wouldn't.
Yeah. And they put a $6 million bond out on him. He'll sit in jail for 17 months until his family can get him better attorneys, defense attorneys willing to take the case. And they will go back to the court and get the $6 million bond reduced down to $1 million. At that point, then the family can post a 10% against that bond. He can finally come out of jail and start working on his case with his new defense team.
This trial of Ron Santiago, because of a bunch of legal issues and all kinds of other things, it's going to be delayed for like 8 years.
Is that crazy? 8 years this goes on. 8 years.
That is a very long time to get somebody to trial. So we talked about the biggest evidence, some of the biggest evidence. We've got the spent shell casing that matches. We got the fact that Ron has admitted that at one point he owned a Ruger 9mm pistol. He says he traded the gun, but has no idea who he traded it to. Has no paperwork regarding the trade.
Just somebody named Robert.
Yeah, he says he thinks his name was Robert.
Yeah. The biggest reason for the holdup is this battle over what you call the spent shell casing. I mean, the defense is trying to not allow it to be part of the trial. And this delays the process.
More than 7 years after John and Bernadette Ohlemacher were gunned down in their home off Dover Northwest, their families are still waiting for justice. That's because this case has had a lot of twists and turns. Now, another one. Recently filed court documents show just a year after the murders, Ronald Santiago's attorneys got an order for Verizon Wireless to turn over Santiago's cell phone records, then got them sealed by Judge Pat Murdoch. Santiago's attorney Joseph Riggs says they're not trying to hide anything. He says it's their right to seal discovery items unless they plan to use them at trial. And he says the prosecution got these same documents during a search warrant, but just didn't realize it. While prosecutors are waiting on that to be worked out, they're also looking into new allegations that Judge Murdoch personally knew Ronald Santiago before his arrest because Santiago handled Murdoch's mortgage. Murdoch is no longer on this case. He left the bench in 2011 after his arrest in a prostitution scandal. But if the allegations turn out to be true,
it might potentially have impacted some of the decisions on motions and things of that nature. And so it's our job to make sure that every decision that was made that's important to the case was made fairly and impartially.
So that's just a snippet, Gibbs, of some of the things that you were talking about, the reasons why this trial took so long to get going. So you have this newscast talking about how Ron Santiago was the judge's loan officer. And then the judge ends up getting arrested for solicitation of prostitution.
Which is crazy.
I mean, you talk about twists and turns, and it's almost like some kind of made
for TV.
Up reality TV.
Absolutely, man.
Non-reality TV.
Lifestyle TV show.
twice Judge Pat Murdoch has thrown out the main piece of evidence in the Santiago case, the bullet casing found in Santiago's home that matched those at the 2005 murder scene of John and Bernadette Ohlemacher. Murdoch first ruled the search warrant was invalid because it was for a day search and police searched at night. The Supreme Court overruled him. Then Murdoch sided with the defense again in a new argument that the search was unlawful because officers secured Santiago's home at 3:15, but didn't get a warrant until 9 p.m. DA Carrie Brandenburg says as far as she knows, everything Murdoch did stands. This case will proceed with a new judge, at least for the time being.
So they get a new judge because the old judge has been arrested for solicitation. But what you hear in the newscast, Gibbs, is what I wanted to talk about, which is a lot of the rulings that the original Judge Murdoch made, they were in favor of the defense because he's ruling against some of the most incriminating evidence.
Sure.
The shell casing, which is probably the most incriminating. If it really was true that, you know, he knew Santiago, I don't want to say they were friends, but you have to question that.
Sure. I mean, there was a business relationship.
There was a relationship there that you would, and I don't know the legality of it, but you would think that a judge would probably recuse himself based on that relationship.
At least disclose it.
Right. And I don't know if that happened or
right.
I don't know when it came out.
But it is a murder case, so I think you're right. You would recuse yourself.
Yeah, and I'm not a judge. I'm sure somebody will tell us we're wrong, but it's interesting. All of these facts are interesting, but a lot of it is what goes into delaying this trial for 8 years. I mean, there's a lot of legal wrangling over what evidence is going to be allowed in, what's going to be excluded.
Right, and we have more that we're going to talk about.
All right, Gibbs, so we have to get back to Renee because Renee's been cleared by this time, right? Long time cleared.
Oh, yeah.
The police have cleared her. But the prosecutor in the case, they know that the defense is going to go after her, right? That's going to be a key part of the defense is to deflect from Ron and try to place blame on Renee.
Yeah, to show reasonable doubt.
Right. So what the prosecutors do is they now decide to take her up on her original offer and have her take a polygraph. And there's something interesting here about New Mexico because it's the only state that allows polygraph results to be admissible at trial. So they asked her a whole bunch of questions, but I want to run through just the key ones. So the detective says, "Do you know for sure who shot your parents in their bedroom?" Renee answers no. Is there something else you're afraid I'll ask you a question about? Renee answers no. And what's interesting about this question, Gibbs, they actually ask it 4 or 5 different times. The same exact question. Is there something else you're afraid I'll ask you a question about? And when you watch the tape, it's almost like they keep asking it because the reading, there's some question about the reading. That's kind of what I was thinking as I was watching it. But she answers no every time. But this whole polygraph thing, it's going to backfire on the prosecution because the results of the polygraph come back inconclusive, right? She didn't pass, she didn't fail. It was inconclusive. But what happens is, as soon as the defense team finds out about this, they jump all over it. And they start a battle in court because they want to be able to use the results themselves. And it's eventually ruled that they can use it and that jurors will be allowed to hear the results of the polygraph that Renee took.
Yeah, which is pretty amazing. So what else comes out during this time is that the defense also went to battle to get the forge check issue thrown out. And they actually win. The judge agrees that it should be removed. The jury should not hear about it because the incident with him forging the checks had nothing to do with the murder case.
Well, it didn't have anything to do with the Ohlemachers at all.
Right.
I mean, it was a totally different couple.
And on top of that, the prosecutor wanted to throw in the cut brake lines. The judge also agreed that that shouldn't be included because he couldn't even see how that was related at all to Ron because there was no findings that Ron had anything to do with that or if there was actually even cut brake lines.
We're talking about all these different rulings, Gibbs, and if you think about it, almost all of them are going the way of the defense and Ron Santiago. So it's not until January 2014, and this is more than 8 years after the murders of the Ohlemachers, that Ron Santiago finally goes to trial. I mean, I can't even imagine 8 years. You've got not just Ron, his family, his friends. Everybody knows that at some point he's going to go to trial. He's been charged with murder. That's a long time to have that sitting on your shoulders.
But some of it benefited him.
It did.
Right?
You're right.
Fighting the motions and things like that. And then the flip side is, how about the victim's family, right? After all this time, you just want some type of resolution. You want to move forward with life, but you also want to make sure that justice is served.
So the trial starts, and right away, Gibbs, the defense is all over trying to put Renee on the hot seat. You know, like you mentioned before, this is one way that they're going to attempt to show reasonable doubt to the jury. And as soon as they get her on the stand, they start asking Renee about her relationship with her parents. And she talks about how much she loves her parents. And she actually has these tattoos now. So on her left arm, she has, "I love you eternally, mommy." And it's actually in her mom's handwriting. And then on her right arm, she has both of her parents' signatures. But Ron's lawyer comes after her about this love that she's professing for her parents. And the way that he does it is by asking her to read from her journal that she kept as a teenager.
Ronald Santiago's defense attorney wants the jury to believe Renee didn't like her parents, Greg and Bernadette. They point to her diary, which was written in the 4 years leading up to her parents' death.
Do you have any memory in there anywhere of having said you loved your parents, you thanked your parents, you appreciated your parents?
It's because I did it all in person.
Prosecutors say Renee's diary shouldn't be taken literally.
Why'd you write all that stuff down?
I like to vent, so me venting is writing in a journal.
So some of the other stuff that she reads out of the journal, Gibbs, is at one point she calls her mom a two-faced, good-for-nothing bitch, and she writes that she hates her dad. Now, I got to talk about this because we're talking about a teenager's journal. I would hate to even see what's in my daughter's journal.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking age they said 4 years up to, so 16, 17.
I mean, you know what a teenage daughter is like. We both have them.
Oh, sure.
And mine get upset with me on a daily basis. I don't even know if they have a journal, but if they do, I'm sure they're saying some things that sometimes maybe are not so nice about me.
Yeah. Well, I say things not nice about you.
Yes, you do.
In my journal.
In your journal. So I just want to put that out there. I know the defense has to do that, and maybe it does mean something. But I want to offer up the flip side of...
Could just be a teenager frustrated with the parents having maybe a little more discipline than she cares for.
The fact that how many teenagers out there are doing this exact same thing.
It's kind of related to if something happened to me tomorrow and they come and look at Mike's browser, just because he has all this crime data that he searches, does that mean he's guilty of my murder?
Doesn't necessarily mean it.
If I come up missing, by the way, everybody, you should probably look at Mike. You know what I'm saying?
But Renee does come back, right? And she says some of these same things we're talking about. She says, I was just venting. I was a frustrated teenager.
And it all makes sense.
But then the defense gets into the issue of Sammy, the dog. And we talked about that a little bit. They harp on the fact that you don't hear the dog on the 911 call.
And you don't.
And you don't. You have to admit that. We didn't touch on it before, Gibbs, but if you remember, she even says that she's worried that the person shot her dog. Now, she wouldn't be saying that if she was hearing the dog bark.
Right.
The reason that she's saying that is because the dog was silent.
So like you said, she was worried that the dog was shot, but we know the dog wasn't because when she comes out of the closet, she actually sees the dog, and her and the dog start to head downstairs because she was informed to walk to the front door and meet the officers. She does that, and she goes outside, and the police come inside, and the dog won't come away from the stairs, and the dog is barking up a storm when the police walk in because it's somebody they don't know, to the point that the police make the comment that to get past the dog, because the dog was barking and growling, that they had to go ahead and mace the dog so they could get upstairs to check on the bodies. So I think it comes back around. Why didn't you hear the dog barking on the 911 call?
And I know we brought it up. I don't know how you answer that question.
But it sure helps the defense's case if you're trying to present some form of reasonable doubt that maybe the intruder knew Renee, was Renee, right? I mean, that's what they're trying to show, that it could have been somebody or anybody but Ron, because if it was Ron, the dog would have been barking up a storm, and you would have heard that on the 911 call.
But is that true? Because Ron had been to the house. He was trying to get them alone.
But how often does a lone originator go to the house? Maybe once?
I don't know. I'm saying there is a possibility that the dog, I don't know if know is the right word, but had seen, interacted with Ron on at least one occasion.
Sure.
Maybe more.
Could have been.
Just throwing that out there.
In fact, it was true. Your parents couldn't get any kind of loans in 2005 because of the bankruptcy. Isn't that true?
I don't know.
Then they questioned Renee about the $500,000 life insurance policy she received when her parents died. Santiago's attorney claims she tried to get the files just days after her parents' death.
Isn't it true that the thing that you wanted in the file cabinet was the thing about the life insurance policies?
No, because I didn't know they were in there.
Prosecutors maintain she's innocent.
Mr. Riggs asked you to speculate as to why the police may have been interested in speaking to you about some life insurance money, but my question for you is, were you ever cleared as a suspect?
Yes.
So part of the defense cross-examining Renee still. Now they're into the money issue that we touched on before, and they're trying to make it seem like this $500,000 would have been a reason for her to want her parents dead.
Setting up motive.
So after all the cross-examination of Renee, the prosecution brings on what is probably their best expert, and that's a firearms expert. And what he testifies to is that the shell casing found in Ron's gun bag was fired from the same gun that killed Greg and Bernadette Ohlemacher. He goes pretty deep into his testimony, Gibbs. I mean, he's talking about all the microscopic markings on the shell casings, and they match perfectly. But keep in mind that Ron all along has maintained that this was not his shell casing. So even if he agrees, he has to agree that it matches, he's still going to say it's not mine.
Yeah.
But the question is, then how did it get in your gun bag at your house? I mean, it's a big deal.
And that's the mystery.
How do you get around that?
And the defense is going to tackle that.
And they do that, Gibbs, by grilling the officer that searched the crime scene at the Ohlemacher house. And what the officer had said was that he found 5 or 6 shell casings at the crime scene. Now, that's not very exact. Is it 5 or is it 6? It's a big difference.
It's a huge difference in a crime scene.
Yes, in a crime scene. If you're talking about apples, doesn't make that big a difference whether
Right.
you have 5 or 6. But Gibbs, the prosecution only has 4 shell casings. But there is a crime scene photo or photos that show more than 4. And that's a big problem.
Yeah, huge.
Because if you only have 4, and that's what you use to test the 5th that was found in Ron Santiago's gun bag, what happened to the other 1 or even maybe 2 that appeared in this photo from the crime scene? And the defense latches onto this in a very big way. Because now what the defense is starting to think or trying to prove or plant at least a seed, Gibbs, is that the reason why they only have 4 shell casings is because one of these was planted in Ron's bag.
And they're going to do a pretty good job of showing this.
So Gibbs, the defense brings out on the stand the investigator who led the search of Ron's house back in 2006. And I think this is really where the case takes a big, big turn, because they're grilling this investigator about all of the photographs that were taken during the search of Ron's house. There were over 100 of them. So the investigator walks through how when they found the ammo bag in Ron's garage, they took pictures of the bag and all the items inside it. And what it showed was gun oil, live ammunition, pins. Now, what's important is that each picture taken was digitally stamped with the date and time. And what the defense is able to point out on a photo stamped 11/31 is that the bag shows no shell casing in it. They're also able to show that a whole bunch of photos prior to the 11/31 timestamp, they don't show any pictures of a shell casing either. But for some reason, the time stamping of the pictures stops at 11/31, and then there's not another one until 11/41. So we're talking about a 10-minute period of time, Gibbs.
A little strange.
Yeah, so they just didn't take any pictures during this 10 minutes, which would be okay. But the problem is the very first picture at 11:41 now all of a sudden shows a shell casing.
Mm-hmm.
But it also has some gauze in there that was not seen in some of the earlier photographs. And now all the pins are gone
Yeah, it's a little strange.
that were in the previous photographs.
Right.
So, the defense is just salivating at this point. They know something's not right here. Or let's say I don't know if it's not right, but they know that they've got something that's showing a lot of reasonable doubt to the jurors. Because it doesn't make sense to you and I. It's definitely not going to make sense to the jurors.
Yeah.
And the investigator can't explain it.
Yeah. Unless they broke protocol and took things out of the bag and then shoved things back in the bag and moved things around to make sure that the casing was on top to see it better, but they didn't take pictures of them doing all that. That's how they would have got around that. The defense did an incredible job of showing reasonable doubt again on this case.
Well, and the reasonable doubt that they're showing or trying to show or trying to suggest is that this shell casing was planted, right? So you take the fact that the prosecution only has 4 shell casings. Photos from the crime scene showed more than 4. And now you got this whole photo mess at Ron's house. it's not adding up. So Gibbs, the defense does not allow Ron to take the stand. Not unusual. We see that a lot. What the prosecution is able to do is they're able to play an old interview that Ron did while he was waiting for trial. And this was with 48 Hours. And on the interview, Ron talks about trading the Ruger gun with some guy named Robert, like we talked about.
So then the prosecution puts on another witness, and it's Greg and Bernadette's neighbor. And he tells the story that he recalls about 12 hours before the murder. Somehow he heard Greg on the phone. So I don't know how close these homes were or if Greg was outside walking around, but he states that he heard Greg on the phone yelling at whoever was on the other side that if there's not money put into my account by tomorrow, I am going to the police. So who was that? Was that Ron? Who could it have been? And that's the thing. We don't know. The police don't know. So I think the defense is able to discredit that fairly fast.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were making an assumption, you would assume it was Ron.
Yeah, I mean, could Ron have done the same thing he did with the Howards, where he gave them forged checks and they went to the bank and then found out that they were bouncing or they weren't, right? But I think that would have came out, right? That's something that eventually would have worked out through the system.
No, I'm thinking more that maybe he promised them money, checks.
Yeah.
And he hadn't delivered. He was behind. They wanted the money. I could see that happening. The problem is, like you said, when it comes to the minds of a jury, there's no proof of anything there, right? So, yeah, it could have been Ron, but it could have not been. There's no way to prove it was. And the other thing I think, Gibbs, is even if it was Ron, what type of motive does it establish? I still don't understand why Ron would want to kill the Ohlemachers or what he has to gain by doing that.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I can think of is he was worried about losing his $100,000 a year job, you know, that if they called and complained that he would be fired. But I just don't know if someone would take something to murder.
No, I mean, that doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
At all. I mean, all we know is that he hasn't been able to get their cash out refi through the system.
And that happened a lot back then. I mean,
but why would he get fired? Has he done anything wrong? I guess that's what we don't know. Did he do something to the Ohlemachers like he did with the Howards? If he did, I'm not aware of it.
Right.
And I don't think it ever comes out that there was anything fraudulent with the Ohlemachers refi.
And you would think that the police would investigate that, and if there was, they would have brought it up.
So the trial took a little bit more than a month. 36 witnesses testified. There were 800 pieces of evidence given to the jurors. So the jury deliberated for 3 days, and then they returned their verdict.
We find the defendant not guilty of count one. Count, please.
Ronald Santiago, not guilty of murder. It took more than 8 years to get to this point, a verdict, keeping the victim's family on edge.
So much sadness. This just topped it all. This is really it was a very sad day for me, for my family. It may not be in our lifetime that we see justice, but God knows Ron's heart. God knows Renee's heart. And we are working to be okay with that.
So you heard the verdict, not guilty. Ron Santiago gets off. And then you hear Bernadette's sister talk about how they're trying to be okay with the verdict. I mean, tough for everybody involved.
Oh, absolutely, man.
In this situation, because you have Ron, who spent at least 8 years with the weight of the world on his shoulders. Then he finally gets to trial. He has to go through that. Now he gets acquitted. And then, like you said, you have the families of both Greg and Bernadette who have no justice. And then you have Renee, who's kind of in the center of it all.
Yeah.
Because she's lost her parents. Almost everybody in her family is suspicious of her to some degree or another. whether they think she had something to do with this or whether they think she knows who did do this.
Right.
There's all kinds of things that come out after the trial. I mean, they do a lot of talking too. But really, if you think about it, Gibbs, there's really nobody that walks away from this thing unscathed.
No, you're exactly right. Did Ron get lucky? Was that shell casing his? I don't know. Did Renee have anything to do with it? I don't know. It's just one of those ones you're just like.
It's a head scratcher.
Yeah.
But that's what makes it so interesting.
Like you said, it really had an effect on Renee to the point she changes her name and moves up to Washington State to start a new life.
Yeah, I would almost think she'd have to.
Yeah, I don't know how she could stay in that area still.
No, because her family has basically, I don't know if disowned is the right word, turned their back on her.
Yeah, and I think at that point, she kind of disowned them too for not being there for her.
Yeah, I think it went both ways.
Right.
There was just too much animosity. I don't know if it was part of the 48 hours, but there was an interview with Greg's brother and Greg's dad, and they actually talked about Renee and talked about whether they thought that they could ever reconcile or have a relationship with her, and neither one of them thought they could. They thought it was too far gone at this point.
Yeah, I think it would be tough, because if you're always going to have that doubt, you're never going to have the trust, and you can't have a good relationship without trust.
So the only thing we know in this whole case, Gibbs, is that someone killed Greg and Bernadette Ohlemacher, and they got away with it.
And it seems to be for personal reasons.
Yeah, it goes back to what we talked about in the beginning. Normally, people don't kill other people for no reason.
Yeah, you have to look at who benefits from the murder. It's really all you're left with, right? Or you just had a random person come in and just felt like shooting two people that day and called it quits and said, no more, I'm not going to shoot the third person.
And I'm not saying that's out of the question, but to me, that's just very strange. If there was a robbery, okay, that's one thing. If there was a sexual assault, that's another thing. But there was none of that stuff. It was basically like walk in the house, shoot two people, leave one person alive, and leave.
Yeah, that's it.
And that's why it's such a head scratcher. And I think going back to what you talked about as far as who benefits, that's why they looked at Renee, because she did benefit.
Sure.
And that's why they looked at Ron, because they thought, and I don't know how he would have benefited other than maybe he needed to silence them to get out of something, but we're not sure what that something is.
Right, because they never really do a good job of laying that out there.
That's the tragic case of the murder of the Ohlemachers, Greg and Bernadette.
I hope they get resolution.
Yeah, this is one that I would love to see solved. Not only for the families, you always want that. You want them to get closure. You want them to get justice.
Yep.
But for a selfish reason, I just want to know what happened.
Yeah, what happened and why did it happen?
This is one that really kind of sticks with me as just such a mystery. I want to know what happened, and I want to know the reason behind it.
So, hey, let's listen to some of the listener voicemails.
All right, we got to do some voicemails.
Hey, Mike and Gibby, this is Matt. I live in New Albany, Ohio, but I'm actually an Alter High School grad. Just want to call in and say I love the podcast. You guys were actually the first podcast I started listening to. Bill Comey from what used to be New Rome, Ohio. That would be a good one for Unsolved, or maybe the Lewington Brothers, the 22 Caliber Killers for true crime. Love the podcast. I look forward to it because my work week actually starts Sunday night, so that's kind of the highlight that I get to listen to it at work. Thanks a lot. Keep up all the good work.
All right, Matt, appreciate the voicemail. Alter grad just down the street from us, Gibbs.
Yeah, Alter Knights, man. Put out some good athletes.
Yep, and got a couple of good case suggestions there that we'll have to take a look at.
Sure do.
Hey, guys, this is Megan from Kentucky. Just wanted to say I am a huge fan of your alls, and I have just binge listened for the past 2 days at work, probably about 14 hours. So keep up the great work. Look forward to hearing more from you all. Keep your own time ticking. Much love from Kentucky.
Keep your own time ticking. We're a big fan of Megan's as well.
Yeah, hey, Megan.
And I'm a big fan of Kentucky, so UK Wildcats. All right, Gibbs, we got to wrap it up. That's another episode of True Crime All the Time Unsolved. So for Mike
and Gibby,
stay safe and keep your own time ticking.